Hey there. We want to visit a little bit about enterprise budgets. And that's what this week's lesson. I'll try to keep this as short as possible, but answer any questions you might have. Of course, you're always welcome to call me or email me with any questions you might have. Enterprise budgets are interesting animals in the fact that they really let us drill down deep and take a look at our operation and see what parts might be losing money, what part might be profitable, and which ones we can ask that we want to keep. There may be some economic advantages of us keeping separation within the business too, so that's one thing to look at. There may be some very, very practical lines of separation. I can think of many operations, and ours in particular, where our farming and ranching is held separate from, say, the outfitting part of the business. The resource that we have in land is actually supporting all these enterprises, but we want to take a look at it on a profitability standpoint separately so that we can determine whether it's worthwhile. And if it's not profitable, then we certainly don't want to be spinning our wheels and actually performing those kinds of functions within our business because we want to continue forward. Profits are a great thing within a business. They are just in today's society, sometimes they're mentioned in the media as not being, noble and those kinds of things, but they are the ultimate in nobility. The way that we can take care of our families, the way we can take care of our team members and our employees, how we can take care of our customers. It boils down to whether or not we can be profitable or not. Profits are an absolute positive, very good thing within a business and something that we need to analyze constantly within our business, our farm and ranch business or Main Street business, whatever it may be. So, and as you have probably gotten to know me a little bit over this semester, farms and ranches aren't any different. The profitability, you've got to make a profit. And of course that's over time, but you can have you can stub your toe with profits on a certain basis, but over the long haul, if you don't have profits and consistently have profits, then those are the things that are the downfall. And eventually that business just goes away, and probably deserves to, because you're not going to be able to serve the people that are relying on your business in order to function. So just to give you a little bit of an outline, we want to define what an enterprise budget is and discuss its purpose. We want to illustrate the different sections of an enterprise budget and how we might construct these kinds of things, give you some just real applied kinds of things on how they're used and the analytics and the benefits of actually looking at the analysis through an enterprise budget. So just to give you an idea, we'll switch slides here and go on. An enterprise budget, maybe in a layman's terms, which pretty much that's how I like to look at it, is just a mini income statement. And it delineates the different parts of our operation. And you may think of your ranch being one continuous or a joined business, but in fact, you've probably got many different parts that you could actually have somebody else do. And that's maybe one way to look at the whole thing, is that if somebody else has an economic advantage, then you might just hire them to do it. In a lot of cases, if you can't afford all the equipment in order to perform all the farming functions, then you may hire it all or partially done by somebody else, just because of the initial cost of capital and things like that. Okay, so one of the prime examples that I've seen in a lot of livestock operations, which we're predominantly livestock here in Wyoming, would be a hay operation. Many people say they just have to have hay, and I don't doubt them in that regard, but whether or not it's profitable or not, or whether somebody else, you could actually buy it from another producer cheaper over the long term than you could having to raise it, take care of it, get it to fruition, and to harvest points. It may be actually cheaper for you to actually buy it. And many of our range operations have come up with that kind of a model in their businesses for their livestock operations, within the state of Wyoming. So that's something that I think that probably was analyzed way in the early origins of agriculture in Wyoming, as far as the profitability and whether it's practical to have an additional enterprise. Another range operation, I do know a few people that actually have purchased irrigated farms so that they can produce what they feed through and put it through the range operation, and they found there's some economic advantages to that. But it's always a good thing to actually take a look at those things and see what if they are in fact worth doing. The next slide that I've got here is just kind of an example of a typical crop operation. Crop operations are actually fairly simple, and the parts of an enterprise budget, this one here is done on a per acre basis. We might actually look at it on just the total crop, but we're at an advantage if we actually boil that down to a per acre basis, so that we can find out what the profitability is per acre. And then we can compare small farms to large farms and those kinds of things. Scale isn't such a big deal in comparisons. So anyway, for the enterprise budget, we'd have the revenue, and this particular budget we're at, well, it's watermelon, so obviously it's not in Wyoming, but we harvest 250 hundredweight, so that's actually 25,000 pounds at 550 per hundredweight. So that's on a per acre basis. So our total revenue for the actual per acre is $1,375. That's all the revenues that we have to account for. We have several different kinds of costs. We have variable costs. Sometimes we actually define these as operating costs. They're synonymous, they're the same thing. And those, of course, a variable cost is something that changes with the level of production. So if we put more seed on, up to a point, it would either increase or decrease the output. So, and same with fertilizer, chemicals, machinery expense, custom spraying, harvesting, and hauling. And also, to a certain extent, the labor that's inputted into an acre of watermelon would be a variable cost. Fixed costs would be those things that don't change. You might remember these definitions from your Ag Econ microeconomics class. Fixed costs are those that don't change with the level of production. And some examples that this enterprise budget gives are that depreciation, interest, taxes, and insurance would not change. And we have those on a per acre basis. We also have some land charges, whether you own it or not. It may be an opportunity cost if you own it, and you would have to, or if you had to rent it, would be a land charge as well. So that'd be a direct type of a cost. Whereas if you owned it, you'd have to charge that opportunity cost to yourself. So you got your total fixed cost, and total variable cost comes up with your total cost. And your estimated profit for watermelon per acre is $19.78. Very straightforward. We can analyze that and compare it whether you're large or you're small and that sort of thing. So crops are very, very straightforward when it comes to it. And this slide here just points out the different parts as we went through that acre enterprise budget for watermelon and the actual definitions for them. Then the next budget that I have here is for an acre of wheat. And as you can see, it gets a little more in depth, but it's basically the same thing. It's got one line item for your revenues when you sell your grain, and then your operating expenses when you go that kind of operating and fixed cost. One thing I might tell you is that not everybody sells all of their harvest at the same time. So you'd have to, in that case, if you're going to sell some at harvest, you're going to sell a partial of it later on, and then maybe even to the next crop season, you would have to get an estimate of those kinds of revenues for on in, and then for any break-even analysis, then we'd have to actually average those particular per bushel types of estimates. Constructing a livestock budget presents a couple of problems, and one of the big things is, we have a lot of cow-calf operations within the state of Wyoming, so is that we have more than one product that we actually sell. And in the simplest form, we typically have heifers and steers, which bring different prices. So we're going to have to get an average of those as far as our break-even analysis goes. And also we have to somehow take into account the culls that sell, and either whether cows or bulls and that sort of thing, and the different price variations. So we may be able to use a constant as far as those goes, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult to actually take a look at that particular kind of a budget. Here's an example where we've got cull cows, heifers, and steers, and you can see that we've got operating expenses, and we have our fixed expenses down on the lower part of that, and profits, total ownership expenses, and profit, which actually in this case ends up being in the negative, so that would be a loss for this particular enterprise. Hopefully that's only for 1 year, and we would have a long term with positive returns or profits within this business, or won't actually survive for the long run. So here's an example. Now, how do you build your own enterprise budgets? Well, I would start out and use some of these third-party budgets. And one of the things that I talk about in this next slide is something has to do with there's a danger in that. Well, because it certainly takes your use of your resources are quite a bit different from one operation to another. Your cost structure is way different. Your revenues may be different because of the way that you market them, and it could have to deal with just distance from market and things like that. Whether you market directly to the consumer, and all that kind of stuff is really changes the enterprise budget. But at least the third party budget actually can give you some idea of what you would input into that particular budget. You might use the numbers. More than likely, over time especially, you're going to input your own numbers so that you can come up with some correct types of enterprise or break evens. Now, there's two concepts when it comes to break evens. There's break even price, and there's break even yield. And the most common probably is, what is your break-even price? Very, very important to know what your break-even price, whether it be crop or livestock. If you're going to put any kind of price risk protection as far as hedges with some options or futures contracts for livestock or crops, it's essential that you lock in a price that is at or above your break-even prices, so that what would be the point otherwise on a consistent basis doing that. You want to, there may be a few times where you actually limit your losses, but especially if there's a time period where it looks like prices are headed south or headed down, but you want to be able to lock in prices that are above your break even, so you can lock in your profits. throughout that production cycle. The way that you would actually calculate that would be your total cost over your yield. So in a livestock operation, the total cost would be all the expenses added together, both your variable and fixed expenses, divided by your yield. And yield might be number of pounds per acre, it might be bushels per acre. It could be figured in several different ways, but those are the kinds of things that we would actually use to get the cost of production or the break-even price for that sort of thing. Now we can also, if we yeah, that's right. This is an example where you could figure out your break-even price at different yields, and it may vary. This one being per bushel dryland, probably wheat. If you only get 35 bushels per acre and your total cost is the same, then your break-even is higher compared to if you get 60. So in all these cases, then you can calculate out your break-even price. So in summary, enterprise budgets are really an interesting angle. Good managers use them. I've got a couple of preloaded types of enterprise budgets that the extension services put together. Your numbers may be completely different, and probably are, but you can actually take them and use them as a template so that, and plug your own numbers in there so that you can come up with a break even that you can live with. And anyway, so I'm going to close her off at that. Hopefully you got a little bit out of that, and we'll put together a little quiz for you and a homework assignment so you can get used to figuring your break evens on that sort of thing. So I appreciate you listening, and take care.